I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to the RANE's Essential Geopolitics podcast. On July 20th, Japan will hold elections for the upper house of its parliament. These elections come under the relatively new premiership of Shigeru Ishiba, and they come as the traditionally dominant Liberal Democratic Party is running a minority government. Chase Blazek, RANE's Asia-Pacific analyst, is here to discuss the outlook for the election and dive into scenarios based on potential election results. Hi, Chase. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Emma. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming on. So why is the upper house so important for Japan, both in general and in the current political context?
Well, in general, it's a little less important. There's two houses in Japan's Diet, or its parliament, and the upper house is the weaker one. So the lower house gets first say on passing legislation, and if the upper house rejects it, the lower house can still override that rejection with the 2/3. Lower house also has the advantage on passing a budget, on electing a prime minister. If the upper house disagrees, they can say too bad, basically, and do it anyway. But right now, the long dominant Liberal Democratic Party, established back right after World War II and has dominated Japanese politics since, they're running a minority government in the lower house, meaning they don't have enough seats for majority, and on every policy they want to pass, they have to partner with at least one opposition party to get the votes to pass it, which means the upper house is more empowered. But up until this election, the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, has been relying on the fact that in the last upper house elections, it won a pretty decent majority in the upper house. So now, in this election, it could stand to lose that majority as well. And if that happens, the upper house will be all more of a check on the LDP's power, given the weakness of the lower house. So upper house is traditionally weak, but right now it is stronger than usual, and it will be especially stronger than usual if the LDP performs poorly here on July 20th.
And what are the possible outcomes of the election, and what factors are driving these outcomes?
Well, I guess the easy part is just defining outcomes. So, the LDP could perform quite well, keeping its majority or even strengthening its majority. It could sort of have a middling result where it either keeps its majority just barely, which would still mean it loses seats, or it could just slightly have a minority, so just shy of a majority, but still deprive the opposition parties of any really strong, cohesive majority amongst themselves. Or the LDP could lose quite poorly by more than, say 5 to 7 seats, losing its majority. If it does so, it would have to partner with pretty significant parties in the upper house to pass any legislation. It couldn't just rely on smaller parties, and that would be a major loss for the LDP. As far as the significance or likelihood of any of these scenarios coming to fruition, it was looking for a while like the LDP was going to basically struggle through but still hold on to some semblance of a majority. They've really struggled electorally, especially since the slush fund scandal of late 2023, which it is what it sounds like. The party was implicated, or a number of lawmakers were implicated within the LDP of having a slush fund and of using political finances improperly. The people were not happy with that. The opposition was not happy with that. That led the LDP to lose pretty badly in the lower house elections in October 2024. And they haven't really resolved a lot of those issues yet. So that's a driving factor among basically a loss of trust in the LDP and sort of anti-establishment growing views among the Japanese populace. And then there's also just populism, and nationalism, which is becoming popular in lots of countries, and Japan is no exception. The Democratic Party for the People was a pretty small opposition party that really outperformed in October 2024 lower house elections. And though they've had some difficulties of their own in the ensuing, 7-8 months, another populist party and sort of upstart party called Senseito which is more right-wing than DPFP, but also populist, also has anti-foreigner vibes, blaming the foreigners in Japan for all of Japan's faults. They've risen to the occasion and started really polling quite well. Some polls even put them more popular than the main dominant opposition party, which is the Constitutional Democratic Party. So there's a lot of populism going around. There's some general economic woes about, how do we afford the cost of living in Japan? Rice prices have been a big issue. And then you have parties like Sanseito, who some would argue, and I would tend to agree, are taking advantage of this situation by blaming the foreigners and having scapegoats and the like. And some of those arguments are gaining some traction. And meanwhile, the LDP seems, by some accounts, to just be sitting there having a fairly boring government. They're not doing anything major, like throwing cash at the people just yet to fix their problems. They're not having an outstanding performance. The LDP and Prime Minister Ishiba are not having an outstanding performance in trade negotiations with the United States to try and remove Trump tariffs. Just basically on every issue, they're just doing kind of okay. And in an era of growing discontent and populism and anger, frankly, about the slush fund scandal, just okay is not good enough. So that's all the factors going into this election, which spells it not looking too good for the LDP.
What are some key implications of various possible election outcomes?
Yeah, I'd say I really just want to consider two for the sake of time. The one is the middling outcome where, the LDP does okay, they don't lose their majority, or they only very slightly lose it. And then the other outcome being they lose quite badly. I'm not really going to consider an outcome where they win a large victory, because that just seems very unlikely at this point. If they have a middling result where they do just okay, maybe they lose some seats, a lot of the current dynamics in Japanese politics will continue. There's a bit of policy gridlock in the lower house, so the LDP has done okay with partnering with opposition parties to pass individual policies. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is likely to survive in this situation if there is just sort of a middling performance, although his time is still likely limited because there are conservatives within the party rallying to replace him. They really don't like him, but he was seen as, I guess, a good interim prime minister. And then the LDP will likely stay in a minority government in the lower house without an opposition government coming to power. If the LDP loses quite poorly, it's a lot of the opposites of what I just said. So Prime Minister Ishiba is almost certainly gone. Either he resigns of his own will to save face or to take responsibility for the loss, or the LDP elders pressure him behind closed doors to resign, or the opposition parties in the fall session of the Diet table a no-confidence vote against him, and it passes, and he has to be ousted. And either way, that will result in a new prime minister, potentially from the LDP, if they can somehow convince the opposition parties to vote for their guy or gal. But it could also present an opposition government where the LDP is ousted altogether because the opposition parties fail to vote for any of the prime ministerial candidates put forth by the LDP, and instead they vote for one of their own. In that situation, we would be set for even more sort of policy dysfunction, policy gridlock, because there are many, many opposition parties in Japan. They run the gamut. They're all over the spectrum, from far left, center right, far right, and so they would all have to agree with one another to form a coalition. And as you can imagine, they would disagree on everything under the sun. So they would have a government under their own guy. They would have to select one of their party's candidates that's not from the LDP to become prime minister, but they would be just as feuding, just as disputatious, fighting with one another as they are with the LDP, and we'd likely see a few years of very dysfunctional politics. And in the meantime, amidst that dysfunction, a lot of the LDP's policy priorities would somewhat fall by the wayside. The LDP's efforts to strengthen the military at home and to increase security partnership with the United States would suffer. And it's not because some of the opposition parties don't want the same thing. A number of opposition parties also support a stronger military in Japan and U.S. ties, but a number don't. And they would largely disagree on how they want to get this done. The opposition parties would. So a lot just wouldn't get done because they don't agree on how to solve the problem. And the same thing with economic issues at home. Some would want to flood the field with stimulus. Some would want to give only certain tax benefits to households, to companies, to have a hawkish stance toward the U.S. on trade negotiations or a dovish stance. So all of these differing viewpoints would suggest that on economic policy, foreign policy, military policy, they really struggle to have any sort of continuity, which would be great for populist parties like Senseito, who can just use scapegoats like the foreigners and have very parochial local issues that they focus on and pass short-term policies. But anything long-term will really suffer in this outcome where the LDP performs quite poorly.
Thanks, Chase. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I'll just add that if the LDP somehow survives this, either they have a middling performance or they perform quite well. There's still a possibility of a snap election coming in the rest of the year in 2025. And the LDP would be motivated to do this either if they had a large victory in the upper house elections this weekend. They would be motivated to have a lower house election to capitalize on that victory to come out of a minority government back into majority government. Or if they just do okay in this upper house election, they would basically bide their time and wait for some of the opposition parties to fall on their faces, to fight with one another, and for the public to get fed up with the opposition parties, and then trigger a lower house election. And those matter quite a bit because, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, the lower house is much more powerful in passing policy, and also the lower house has the trump card on selecting the next prime minister. So if that goes forward, a snap election either in the weeks following an upper house election or in the rest of 2025 or early 2026, that could have some pretty outsized impacts on policymaking and who is the face of Japan in the role of the prime minister in things like the trade negotiations with the United States.
Well, thanks again. Look forward to hearing more from you about this going forward as it develops and as you continue to write stuff on our platform.
Yeah, it won't be boring. It won't be boring, but we'll definitely be publishing an update for this very complex election story early next week.
Sounds good. If you're interested in reading Chase's piece on this topic, you can visit our website, ranenetwork.com, to learn how you can sign up. That's RANE network.com. Thanks for joining us.